Good evening and welcome to this special town council meeting. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We have in person 4 of our council members. One council member is on Zoom, so she'll be participating with us remotely. I want to point out that the folks from Montgomery Municipal Cable are here. They've helped us with the audio and video setup. They'll be recording this for us and making it available online. And we will be using them down the road for our video production needs with our council meetings. So let's see, any adjustments, any changes to the agenda tonight? Are we good?
No changes.
No changes? We're good with the agenda?
Yep.
All right, okay. Then let's start. Just want to point out, we have 2 items on our agenda tonight, 2 things that we're going to be discussing as a council. One is renovation of this building, Town Hall. We're not deciding tonight what we're going to do in terms of what the final outcome is going to be or what we want this building to be. We're discussing what we want the range of options to be, what we want an architectural restoration firm to consider and to present to us. What are the sort of the parameters of that? So again, this is not a decision. There's no deciding tonight about, are we going to paint the outside hot pink? We're not doing anything like that. It's just, it's several steps prior to that. The other thing we're going to be discussing is the town office renovation and what space we're going to use or not use for expanding and giving our staff space for doing their work. So let's start with a presentation by residents. I'd like to start with the folks who are able to come in person. So Marion, would you like to kick us off? Could you please come to our microphone and tell us your name and address? And
Marion Green, 11010 Montrose Avenue. I'll read, that'll move us along. I favor a modest renovation. Fix what's broken, add technology, be green, address acoustics, and a caterer's kitchen. In the previous real estate ventures that the town is engaged in, starting in the 50s with the recreation center that had a massive amount of volunteer support that went on for a very long time. It turned, the building became a nursery school as well as the library, which when they put park in the Kensington Park, that's what was happening in the 50s here. The swimming pool, which was a one-of-a-kind venture, real estate for sure, and a lot of volunteerism. St. James Chapel, this building, which needed to be purchased before some other agency or neighbor purchased it. There were strong advocacy. A lot of problems came up in discussion. What has become Penn Place was another example of strongly held views that came into play. Porcupine Woods, another real estate venture. All of these undertakings were marked by strong advocacy from volunteers who saw unmet needs, developed ideas, committees provided continuity, and change where change was needed. Volunteerism is essential. Perhaps our recent town election was a fluke, and the spirit of volunteerism exists and will grow in the town. And certainly the success of anything that happens here in town hall is going to depend on how much and who and how long. There's been a trend toward people working very, very hard and then disappearing. And I can believe in brownout. And I think that's one of the issues when people have an opportunity to discuss what their experiences have been. And I think we have people who will do that in terms of the use of the space. That again shows respect for the volunteers that make programming happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ken? Is it Ray-Ben? Ray-Ben?
You do a good job.
But is that right? Ray-Ben?
That's right. Ken Raven, 4802 Strathmore Avenue.
Excellent.
So I'm a neighbor of the town hall. Our property is just on the other side of that window. And because I'm not as good a public servant as you folks, you can watch me eating dinner later. We love having this town hall facility next to us. It has been a fabulous part of being a resident in the town with the events that are held here, the Film Society, elections, having the bell rung after elections, which I kind of hope we could go back to. But we love having the facility. The town hall, the town staff has been outstanding in responding to any issues we've had, which have been few and far between. And we get a lot of joy from the activities that are taking place here when it's rented out. So the rear of this property has a beautiful garden and a patio. And it's just such a pleasure to have weddings, birthday celebrations where people are coming in from town, from outside. It adds to our life having this structure here. We've been discouraged over the years with the decay of the property. It's just evident on the outside and has caused the council to take action. And we applaud that effort. We're very supportive of the hard work that has gone into this so far. We would ask that the council, as it evaluates the options, respects the historical architectural tradition of the building. We think it's very appealing. It speaks to us. We would like to see that sustained over time. With my background in the fire service, I'm eager to see a little bit more in the way of fire protection systems in this facility. I just dread the possibility that this beloved structure would go away. And I fear that, the probability is higher than we would like. I'd like to sum up by saying we really appreciate the hard work that's gone into this. What Stephen's done over the last months, we've not contributed, frankly, to this effort, but we've watched carefully, and I'm so impressed with the diligence, the thoughtful effort that's moved forward. Reading the packet today, 90 bloody pages. Oh my Lord, I'm glad you didn't print it. I was also impressed with, oh, so much for green. I was so impressed with the thoughtful comments from the citizens of the town. There were not very many statements that I came across that rubbed me the wrong way. I'm just grateful to have neighbors that are thinking carefully about the future of the town. So to show how bad a citizen I am, I'm going to be leaving because we're going to be departing on a trip, and I have things I need to do, but I wanted to come and just tell you as a neighbor, we are supportive of this effort and we appreciate the hard work that the elected officials of the town and the town staff are providing for this. So thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Is there,
Can we sign you up to help review for the fire service, fire protective design?
And I'm not a fire protection engineer. There's somebody else in town who is. No. so
we know where you live.
I'm not an engineer. I only play one on TV. But I just think it's something, a project. The fire protection elements of this structure are important.
That's fair.
Thank you.
Enjoy your trip.
Thank you. Cheers.
Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to address the group? Apparently Jack Mandel would like to do so.
I'm Jack Mandel from Rokeby Avenue. So I'll address having 20 years experience of putting on a lot of different, mainly films here, but I just want to encourage the design to be very modular in the sense of when we looked here at using the speakers, for example, that are built in, they were broken, they're lousy speakers, it didn't work. So we end up having to, for the films, we end up having to bring our own speakers. We actually have been the town's been very generous in allowing us to store the equipment, which is now at my house, but is usually stored right over there. But we still, all of us are probably in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who are the kind of the leads of the Film Society. And what we notice is, well, we don't like to pick up the speakers like we used to. And so we're looking for, again, modularity. We're looking for, because things are going to change. We've gone from 16mm films with a single speaker to DVDs and now to computer-based films. And over the next 20 years, it's going to change again. And so the town needs to be in a position to change things out. And I would just encourage that to do something like that. Don't build a speaker into the wall that's not going to be there, or that's going to outlive its usefulness in 10 years. As for the kitchen, we put on a lot of food events. The Film Society food is normally prepared off-site and brought in here. So the idea of having a warming kitchen, if that's what it's called, versus a full kitchen is absolutely first rate for us. We also think that the idea of, if you could modularize, but also as a way to recapture some of that to kind of like have lock capabilities on screens, on projectors, on speakers, and only with the town's permission and separate PIN numbers or whatever will they be able to get to those as a mechanism to ensure who's using it, that they're paying for the services, and that it will be for the benefit of the town. That's about all I have. Thanks.
Thanks, Jack. Is there anyone on Zoom that would like to participate? Just a second. Anybody? Anybody online? Doesn't look like it. Okay. All right, Sue.
First, I'm Sue Petito. I live at 11409 Rokeby Avenue. I too have been here as first a mom with kids, but also a host of many events. Most of them musical, most of them open to the public, some of them private. The use of the piano has been invaluable, I think, at large for the whole community. And I want to applaud whomever, maybe Elizabeth.
Sue, I've got a request if you can get a little closer to the mic from somebody on Zoom. They're having trouble hearing you.
Sorry, is that better?
Little closer.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, do I have to start over? I wanted to applaud all the efforts to cleaning up the exterior of the piano. You know, if one were to sell this instrument, it would be not a huge sum, but if you were to buy it new today, this instrument would cost over $90,000. So like the town owns trucks and maintains them, maintaining the piano is important as an ongoing general matter. And the new cover is spectacular and it fits. So to have a space where music can still happen is of course important to me. And along with music events also comes food and celebrations. And a warming kitchen is what we have been using, but if something more sophisticated can be incorporated, if we call it a catering kitchen, that would be even more useful, I think. The upgrade of all of the electronic possibilities, of course. And I would like to see an expansion of rooms out the back if the building stays here. And I would like to see a kitchen area with a door to close because among other things, some of my dearest friends in town were made in the kitchen here, participating in group events that were open to the whole town. And they're valuable, you know, but that's all I really have to say. Thank you for taking such good care of the piano.
Thank you.
Barb, should I read the emails that Kayla brought, or?
Yeah, there should be 4 at your places. I think those who submitted the comments would likely appreciate that. I know at least one person couldn't attend tonight.
4. I mentioned myself. Okay. Chris Keller's is really long, so I'm going to save that. This is from Joanne Schmader. It says, "Hi, Barb. I know there are many considerations already on the table for tonight's meeting, but another one should be resiliency planning, like having backup power in times of electrical outage, the use of town hall as an emergency shelter, as a cooling, charging, free Wi-Fi center, etc. Obviously, those services and equipment can come from the ARPA funding." So that's Joanne Schmader. Sid Rosenzweig. Having looked over Steve's synopses, the thing that most jumps out to me is that we should not move town hall. There's no particular synergy that I can ascertain to having the town hall with the restaurant, post office, and town offices. The original idea of having a communal space with stuff together, like a Park Place, I think that's Penn Place, is all well and good, but that effort failed a century ago. At best, the benefit to a move would appear to be more parking, but there's always parking within a block, on Oxford, on my block of Montrose, and on Kenilworth on the north side of Strathmore. I think that the lighting, acoustics, and technology in the main room need to be made current for films, presentations, small concerts, and the like. In addition, the warren of small spaces in the back ought to be opened up, if possible, to make more of the footprint functional in some way. From Jeannie Mandelblatt. I can't attend the meeting, so I'm writing to express my view. I'm strongly opposed to spending any money on town hall except minor repairs needed. I cannot see how the expense provides any benefits to town residents, and I see many more pressing needs in terms of aging infrastructure and climate change threats. In the same vein, I think minor renovations to the town office might be needed, but costs should be very minimal. In my view, any expenditures here have the appearance of waste. Chris Keller, I see you on Zoom. Do you want to summarize what you emailed?
No, that's all right. So long as the council members received that email, it was sent, I'm sorry, and I apologize for the tardiness, but so long as it was received, I don't think it's necessary to be redundant by reading it into the record. Thank you, though.
Thank you. So any last minute? George Miller or Martin? No, okay, all right, then, it's now up to council to discuss. So we are looking at what are the parameters for this RFP, this request? What are we going to put in the sort of the guidelines of what we're asking an architectural firm to look at or to present to us? Steve, can you clarify? Like, I'm not saying this correctly.
That's correct, but putting together the scope, they would ask them to put in a report, and usually a report like this becomes a concept report or a schematic report, and then that would guide a full design. So it's usually a good resource to go back to, kind of what's your historic preservation approach, what's your, on all the exterior of this building, what's your interiors approach, what's your program, what are your acoustic approaches, what are your equipment approaches? Things have changed a lot in recent years, so it'd be good to update a lot of those just facility things about the building, and then about a historic building, and then about what the building could do for the town. Roll that together and use that for a design.
So what we're doing is we're asking architectural preservation firms to bid on the chance to come up with options, concepts for us to then consider. So it's,
And I think it's important that the concept RFP include a budget, or at least the beginnings of the budget, so that we know what approach and what the costs involved would be.
right, make sure your microphone is close to you. But yes, I think that we need, that needs to be part of what we're requesting
Correct.
is a budget. What's,
Correct. That's almost always in the appendix, and then you would have whoever that architect is as the prime contractor. They would hire engineers that are really specialized in, or at least have abilities that deal with a building like this. A lot of different consultants, they might deal with office buildings or hospitals. They're not used to working behind a plaster ceiling, for example, like that. Yeah, sorry. So that architect as a prime with preservation experience would hire the right consultants to be able to kind of lead the guide, to lead that report and figure out what should be on the table for a building like this. And then,
And also it would be important that it includes the zoning and permitting requirements to make sure that we've got all that covered.
right, we don't want have extra
Right.
expenses. We want to know soup to nuts.
Right.
What are we gonna, what's this gonna cost? What are the various
Mhm.
proposals? So I'd envisioned that we talk about this in presenting what the problems are, what the main issues are, that we want all the concepts. So I'm envisioning 4 proposals that we ask for 4 different concepts. And each of them should address certain issues. We know the sound here. We know the audio visual is something that needs to be fixed 100%. We know there are certain things that we know need to be included in every design. So what are those things? Is that, I mean, this is sort of common knowledge, I guess, because we've had several reports done on this. The Balladimus report from 2015 lays that out. But the priorities, things that Jack mentioned, the audio, as Sue mentioned, the preservation of the piano and having a safe space for that. Kitchen being updated, is part of the requirement that we update the kitchen? Is a caterer's kitchen a thing that we want, or do we want to continue it to be a warming kitchen? Are we satisfied with the level of what's there?
One of the issues we have to consider with a kitchen is that once you go to much more than what we have, we now have to certify it. We're gonna have to have fire protection. We're gonna have to have somebody who is capable of operating it in a sanitary manner. So it's not as simple as saying, upgrade the kitchen. It's gonna require a bit more. I'm sure Lisa's probably dealt with that in many ways.
Inspections, permitting. I mean, it's a much more complicated and expensive process to build it and maintain it. I know that Bannockburn just did a nice warming kitchen. I saw it. I've talked to the architect who designed it. You know, I think it's gonna come down to, you know, costs and benefit, but it seems to me a warming kitchen would suffice most of what we've been doing here in the past for
Benefits,
events.
benefit's a key word though, because that's the thing that could be considered is there a benefit to having something that is a real food service kitchen? Like did another historic building like this in DC where we made a demonstration kitchen. That's what they were using it for, cooking classes and cooking club thing. They did need some of those permits. It's a little bit different than a regular commercial kitchen, but sort of in between. So that's the sort of thing. Is there enough of a wish for people to do that sort of thing that we haven't done in the past in the future to make it worthwhile to take that extra step to make that kitchen? But if it's always going to be used the same way it has been for like town dinners where it's prepared food just brought in and laid out in trays, then yeah, it's really
Keep
a
it
warming
warm.
kitchen. Yeah.
Jerry,
I would think that we'd want in your four,
you pull close.
in your four options, you'd want the most basic level of upgrading the current kitchen still to a warming kitchen, but with modern, the best that we can get appliances and maybe more space, more oven space, you know, et cetera. And some additional space in the room for maneuverability. And then we could maybe explore in higher level options, something above that and what that would cost, not just in operations, but also maintenance.
For an example, we just built a kitchen over on 7 Lux and Bradley that was on a commercial code, and we had to put in an Ansel hood with a sprinkler in case there was a fire in the stove, and it's just a huge amount of expense and complication. So let me just leave it at that.
Do we also, would that mean that only certain people could operate the kitchen or?
No,
Okay,
no,
So the permit would belong to the town.
Correct.
And it would be the town's responsibility to ensure that it was being used appropriately and safely.
Yeah.
Barb, did you want to?
No, I just wanted to say, Councilmember DeBose has her hand up.
Oh, okay,
We
sorry.
just need to remember she's out there.
Sure. Donna, go ahead, please. Member Donna DeBosch is.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. Just as a quick clarification, when discussing kitchen specifically, what is the definition of a just a regular warming kitchen versus a commercial kitchen, and are we all understanding the same definition of such? And having said that, if commercial kitchen means commercial in the sense of the kind of kitchen you see in a restaurant, I don't think we need necessarily that, but upgraded and improved appliances and space is I think needed and recommended, but anything beyond that, I don't think that would be a complete requirement, and probably would be could be otherwise outsourced to either a restaurant in the area or what have you. Thank you.
So one idea I had, which just want to throw that out there, is several years ago when I was thinking about starting an ice cream business, I was looking for a commercial kitchen to rent. And it was kind of hard to come by. And the idea of maybe this is an option, maybe this is a revenue source, just throwing it out there, that if we had an upgraded kitchen, if we had a commercial kitchen, that a chef, a budding chef, I think there are several in town that rent commercial kitchens, or at least there are one or two. This could be a way that we could help pay for things. This is a use of the building that wouldn't disrupt any other. It would, there could be an exercise class going on in here and someone cooking once or twice a week in a kitchen. I mean, that's something to have in mind, is maybe there are some unconventional or previously unconsidered benefits, that could come about. That being said, I know that I would not be eligible for such a thing, but generally I like the idea of at least having the option. What would an upgraded warming kitchen meaning that no food is actually prepared there, but it's only there's oven space just for heating food that's already cooked and just bringing it to safe temperature.
really could be looked at as that's the base as a warming kitchen, and you just look at that. And I think that's what you're saying, like Jerry Lee, right? You could take the same thing and add in that extra step for X amount of dollars. The space really wouldn't be that much different. It doesn't necessarily have to look like a restaurant kitchen. It could be something that really looks like a residential kitchen, but it just has a lot of the health and safety requirements with the sprinklers and 3 compartment sink and hand wash sink, all those kind of things. Yeah, so there's a lot of extra equipment. There's skillful ways it can be designed so it doesn't look so institutional. So it doesn't have to be extreme one way or the other. It could be kind of a hybrid to have capability.
To be ADA accessible, the counter spaces,
Yeah.
that
So-
was another
so-
hoop to jump through.
Is there consensus to include a request to look at both warming kitchen and upgraded commercial kitchen? Is that something that we want to look at?
I would agree.
Okay,
Premium option.
Options is nice.
yes,
Yeah.
I found one,
So
can you scoot forward so you can? get
yeah,
one?
so I think that beyond the kitchen, I think some of the issues that I think should be included in this RFP at one point is to put a lower level in this building and put all the HVAC systems, all the equipment down there and some storage space, and then open up the back so we don't have so many little spaces.
Mhm.
And then add, and maybe move to a better place, the bathrooms, and make them accessible.
So let's tackle that a little bit at a time.
Okay,
So one issue being storage,
Right.
the need for more storage space. Does it have to be in the basement? Could it be moving up, taking the
another
roof off
level.
and making another level? I mean, this isn't for us to decide right now.
Right.
That's not what we're doing. But what we're doing is we're asking, we want to tell these firms, we have a need for more space. Is that accurate? And it's not just for storage of things like speakers or music stands or things like that. It's also for things like the HVAC and
Equipment,
other equipment like that.
which,
Right,
right,
sorry, Lisa, I just wanted to say, I like that idea of giving them the functional requirement as opposed to telling them how to meet it, but we do
Yes.
have to be specific about what kind of storage we need.
right.
That it does need to be.
Right, how
more-
frequently accessed and what it needs to
Yes.
store,
And will it need an elevator to get it up and down?
locking.
Well, maybe not. It depends, because I've thought about this, and Steve and I have talked a little bit about this too, about the fact that, it would help a lot for the mechanicals to be able to have a full basement underneath this building, and it would be great for storage. But the one thing we'd have to do is consider a non-public space, because as soon as we consider public space, it has to be ADA capable. If it's only accessed by a handful of people, then we don't have to meet that requirement. So it would be great for storage of particular things, like maybe archives might eventually end up putting things down there that are rarely accessed, but would still be accessible for an archivist. We'd probably have to build a special room for that maybe, or we'd have to do some special requirements to ensure that the stuff was kept at proper temperatures and humidity levels and so on and so forth. Consideration should be made for the town staff if they wanted to have some type of break room, bunk room, overnight room for when they plow snow. Definitely, I would put all the mechanicals downstairs. It would make it a lot easier for everyone. And the other thing is, we can consider something such as either putting a backup generator down there, or they make ones that go outside, but
Is if a space is not considered a public space, could someone like the Film Society, would the Film Society going down there to retrieve equipment, would that be considered a public use?
I would think not. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say for
Right.
sure, but I would think not, because to me, the public space would mean that people go down there for meetings, they go down there for events, they go down there
Activities.
for some type of regular activity where everybody's going down there versus a very limited number of people going for definite purpose, I'll say.
Anybody have any insight as to the answer to that question?
I say we put it on the list for the attorney, and there will be more, I'm sure.
I'm sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Attorney on the architect, because it's always hazy with that sort of thing. It's a lot of times if somebody would make the argument that they really need to get there, then you typically need to provide accessibility, but If it's really just town staff doing things and it's not, say, an instructor that's going to get to a place, that it might be one thing versus the other. So it would be important for that to be studied. It could be the kind of thing where it's an accessible route to get down there, but not necessarily an elevator. You might not need mobility, accessibility for a wheelchair, but the stairwell would be accessible dimensions, and your doors would be, and so on and so forth. And then probably be good to just get the overall kind of percentage of the space that we would need for it. So like hotels will do 10 to 15, sometimes 20% of the meeting room space as storage, because it holds all your tables, chairs, your AV equipment, everything else. So we may want to look at some of those ratios. But then the other thing is, we've had in the past, I think a fair amount of things that are stored by different groups that use things here, whether it's exercise equipment or even just things that are specific to like a certain club. Maybe there's going to be some sort of a storage area that is programmed in where those spaces or those groups could rent a locker, say, or rent a small closet or a half a closet. That would be a little bit of a revenue source for us, but also be a convenience for them.
You had talked at one point, Steve, about going back to the cutout and the window in the front for the historic. Is that something that you think we should put in the RFP as well?
So that I want to broaden that a little bit.
Okay.
When we talk about making this building historic and respecting the historical nature of this building, what does that mean? Does that mean going back to the footprint of the original building? Does that mean making the front more original to the more like the original, but allowing other parts of the building that you don't necessarily see in the back? I guess I'm thinking of the Chevy house. There's a Chevy house on Argyle that recently put an addition on the back, and I wouldn't know that it was there, the addition, because it was done so respectfully from the front. So what do we mean by respecting the historical nature of this building or the historical nature of this town? Is that a fair question? Am I?
Well, one question that I don't know if has been resolved is, are we going to pay an architect to include in the concept, one concept being to move this building? Or are we not going down that road anymore?
Is that? I
Might
think
be
that
jumping
does,
ahead,
I
right?
think
'Cause-
that does fall, I think that sort of falls under the question of historical nature, though.
Right.
I think that should be something that we consider. I don't think that shutting down an idea, even if it seems outlandish, you guys, I guess there wasn't a lot of support for my idea for a discotheque and Taco Bell. But
Does disco anymore?
nobody does disco anymore. But I think that it's important to have our minds open to what is possible, even if it's a little bit radical. And that there might be elements of something radical that aren't so radical. So I would support, and I would like us to consider and have one of the options be, what else could we do to have a town hall? What else could a town hall mean to this town? I mean, it's not committing to doing that, but it is having thinking outside the box.
There's going to be a substantial amount of money that you're going to spend for somebody to do that.
Please.
You're going to spend a lot more money to have one of the concepts be to move the building to a different site than to keep it here and then decide what we want to do to make it the way we want it here. I just think it's a fundamental question. And do we want to pay for the money to think about moving it? Because I've talked to a lot of people in town recently and asked them about their thoughts about moving it. And I haven't heard a lot of people thinking it's a good idea. And I talked to somebody yesterday who was saying, if we're going to have events and parties and to move it on the other side and then fight the train noise, they thought that was a really bad idea. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
I personally would not support moving the town hall.
Okay, but we're not talking about, or would we support moving it? We're talking about whether we
I wouldn't support
considering it.
paying for a design and a budget and a feasibility to move it,
Okay, all right,
since
Jeremy.
it's been here a long time.
Okay,
Yeah, so I'd like to hear Steve's opinion on what the additional cost of exploring that option is, because I'm in agreement with Lisa that it's really an unlikely to be approved option. And so I'm interested to hear, how much are we going to pay for something that is really has very little support from the public? And I'm not sure how many town council members.
Sure. I do want to say that I've also talked with people who have said, wow, that's kind of a really interesting idea that, you know, what is that? So it's not that clearly I'm in favor of exploring this option, or exploring what it could be. But I'm not the only one. So,
I've heard about equal. I think people think it's not a good idea versus people think it's an interesting idea, but I think it's like everything else in public discourse, or even especially in this town. It's like it's a lot easier to it's a lot quicker like people to be against something versus want to consider something. I think we've seen that a lot on projects around. So I think that was the reason for pitching it as a study, is to kind of see what could happen. And I don't think it would cost a whole lot in the study, because it's not like you would do one whole study and then repeat everything again. So a lot of the items are going to be shared amongst all of it. Your historic analysis, your analysis in the bathrooms, the storage, the kitchen, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really a matter of, you probably would do like a pretty heavy detailed look at multiple concepts here. And you would do something really quick to just say, hey, what if you just took some of the basic concepts of there and then look at just the pros and cons over there? And I agree, like one of the biggest challenges against over there is the train noise. So, but originally that was meant to be like one of the big public spaces in this town. It's unusual to have something like this happen. It just happened because the town really started in the 1880s, I think, and it had a lull of development after 1900. And there was only, I think, like 30 or 40 houses. So this was just a big half a block that was open. So somebody just bought this lot as a group and put the church here. And then eventually all the houses kind of surrounded it. So it's not like it was planned to be here.
Right.
So it just had me thinking early on that I've always seen it as something where this building, I know everybody will say it gets used a lot, but I walk by it most of the time. I think it's empty. It doesn't really get used as much as maybe was thought. And it had me thinking, would we get more utility and more bang for the town's buck by considering moving it over there, where it might be, you know, in conjunction with the town offices and the post office and the restaurant and tennis courts and everything else, where it would be more of like a town center of sorts. And
so
just to check it out.
So what
that's what started it.
what would the
So-
cost be? How much additional, like how much would each of these? What's the big picture of what are these bids going to cost? What, I mean, the bids that we get back.
For four. You're
For
talking about
four options.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
how much is that going to cost? I know you don't know because you're not going to bid on this. I don't know if George, if you have
Yeah, and
any
maybe we
insight.
shouldn't talk too specific costs about that on the.
Well, but we don't have any, but we're not talking about any specific bids. This is,
I
are we,
know.
Barb, is this kosher to ask like an estimate? I mean, are we talking,
I think,
I guess what I'm wondering is, are we talking that this is a $50,000 thing or this is a $300,000 thing?
Yeah, I think it's fine to talk in sort of very broad based, how many digits. I think to echo Jerry's comment, I wouldn't get too specific because undoubtedly there are going to be prospective bidders who are going to be listening to this meeting.
Okay, fair point.
So
Um,
$8,316 and 14 cents. Now, I think I kind of have a picture and a range of what I think it might be, and it's probably not really important to talk about what that number range might be, but I think the key would be that a lot of effort probably should be spent on those things that are shared amongst all the concepts, and probably a lot of effort being put into detailing multiple, the very likely concepts, and then it could be catered to be a very limited look at probably something that is, you know, perhaps out of the box, or something that's very minimal that would probably be also as much of a long shot. And an example of this is years ago, I did a study for a recreation center in New York City, and we had three options, but then later that's what the client wanted to do, was to come up with something that was really kind of a stretch option. And it worked really well because we did something that was really outlandish. It was to take a park and build a residential tower on top of it, so that the residential developer would pay for the park and make the park twice as good as what Parks Department ever thought they could do. So they ended up, it gave them really good usefulness to kind of really ponder the question. They ended up not doing it, but it really kind of stretched all the options below it too. And they ended up getting the funding to do the largest of the three options that was below it. And then I think something that was kind of strategic, what we did is I drew the concepts for that XL concept in an afternoon. And we talked to a real estate developer and he ran up some numbers on what might be involved in that the same way in a couple of hours. So it was much smaller component comparative to the other plans where I did like painstaking concepts of figuring out how the climbing wall and everything else was going to work. This was a really just a quick and dirty to kind of say, what do we do if we start pulling things out to something that you might not have considered? A lot of times, even if you don't do it, there's a benefit of it.
Phil, we haven't heard from you.
So I guess one of the things would be, can we make it almost a fifth option as to move? Because if we look at it, I'm making some assumption that basically the building is going to stay pretty much the same as if we had done something here. The only difference would be its location.
Possibly other facilities brought into it. So maybe in one spot, it could be something where
Steve,
it could be a scenario where something is built underneath of it. Maybe there's town offices below it, or there could be town offices and a second meeting hall beside it, those kind of things. It's been suggested before to bring town offices over here, but I just don't feel like it makes sense to have it in the back between two houses. So other places that could be possible here, I just don't think it's possible.
No, agreed.
Yeah, so.
And I think it's important to recognize that if
Hold
we.
on a sec.
Hang on, let me
Right.
just finish.
Good.
So we do have two town lots that are still over by Penn Place that we could do something with. I mean, we could certainly build another meeting hall or some other facility if we desired over in that area and still have something over there. And then I would have to wonder about the historic side of it, whether or not moving it becomes a historic problem because of the fact it's been cited here for so many years. But what I'm wondering is, could we make it either a fifth option of just the costs of the moving it and relocating it, and then the rest of it would be covered by some of the other options? We'd roll in the other options. I think it's very similar to what you're talking about.
I think having it be the fourth, I don't know that a fifth is necessary. But the idea that this fifth, big picture, what's possible, I think it makes sense if we say we want the bulk of your effort and bulk of your time, the bulk of the cost to be on these other three, and then just let's give us a little hint of what could be. I mean, go ahead, Jerry Lee.
No, I was waiting my turn.
No, I'm Lisa.
And I think Lisa had a comment.
Can you speak forward to
The
them?
benefit of moving this is that then you've got a buildable lot here that's probably worth $1 million or so, $850 to $1 million. So, it's not like the land would just sit here and be worth nothing. So I just think that's something to consider if we're talking about pursuing that option.
And I'm sorry, I'll quick counter that by saying that we have such a lack of green space in this end of the county that I would suggest it become a park, but
Then it'll be worth
we got a
nothing.
couple ways. to
Right.
look at it.
Jerry Lee.
So I would support this fourth option at a lower level of detail that would factor in addressing some of the concerns such as parking
Mhm.
and what you would do with this space, which could be both pros and cons, noise, etc. So as long as it addresses both the issues and it's very conceptual so that we don't throw a lot of funding into a design that seems less likely to
Okay.
be the chosen option.
Donna, would you like to weigh in on this at all?
She's on mute.
I think you're on
Yes,
mute.
I'm right here. No,
Sure, so
yes,
what-
thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I think in consideration of the four, are we taking into consideration how much funding we in fact have? Or are we doing this more of a pie in the sky kind of approach? I'm more in favor of a more realistic approach to whatever changes we need. There's the basics and then there's the extras. Are for perhaps too many extras, and if we can't afford them, then there's just kind of without too much sense.
I'm not.
I just want to make
I'm
sure that
afraid I-
take it into consideration.
I'm afraid I didn't. Did anybody get a better hear.
Donna, I think you're gonna have to speak slowly and clearly because none of us could understand what you were just saying. I'm sorry.
Or if you could, email Barb real quick.
Yeah.
That would
Okay,
be
then
helpful.
I will email Barb. I know I'm in the best
Okay.
area.
I appreciate
you.
that. Thank you.
I think she was saying something to the effect of, wondering if it's being planned to a certain amount of budget that's available versus just planned and then figure out a budget. I would think it's the latter, but then I think she was also asking another question about that, like it should be separated out, so it's the base and the extras. So I might have been wrong, but maybe send us a smiley face if that sounds right, Donna.
What Stephen just described is what I heard. I'm still waiting for the email from Donna, but I think she was talking about to what extent do you all want to spend time and money exploring things that we might not be able to afford in any event? And to what extent does that factor into it? And I think as Stephen said, she brought up in her mind that there are very basic things that need to be done, and then there might be extras if we can afford them.
Another piece is that if we were to move it to over by the train tracks, potential of it being considered a main street. And there is funding for that kind of thing, like what do you call it? Like a rejuvenation, like a main street rejuvenation. There is funding for that. So like, I get it that we don't want to write more checks than we can cash, but there are lots of other considerations.
Mayor, if I may, Donna did just email in the chat. She said Stephen did understand the point she was trying to make.
Okay, Jerry.
I swear this will be my last point.
No, this is what we're here
on the relocation. I just wanted to say I really liked what Phil suggested, that if we're going to conceptually consider this, that we also consider using the land the town already owns to build something new for the functions that we seem to be concerned about lacking in that town center area, and potentially leaving this historic building in place to be a community activity event center.
Okay.
And as part of that, one of my reasons for liking that option is I'm a South Sider, and I really feel like it would be a very high bar to win me over to move Town Hall, this building, away from the South Side. So I just want to make that clear up front. That's how I feel about it right now. It's a very high bar for me. So you all can vote no for me in 2 years if you really want Town Hall on the other side of town.
There's a platform.
Yeah.
Getting it out early.
So
I always knew it was like a long shot, but part of the other thing that originally got me on this wavelength thinking about it years ago was I was thinking it's going to be a pretty big cost to do this building, and we get very little revenue out of it. It could take decades to ever pay this off. It's not like Penn Place where we had a pretty substantial sum of rent from black market and post office and so on and so forth. So, I mean, it's really a big investment. So it had me kind of thinking like if there's something we could do that makes it more usable by more than one group per day, usable by more than one group at a time, usable for things that people hadn't really thought about. Maybe there's like smaller meetings. They're like, and they might be like, we had this happen with committees before, like, you don't want the whole rigmarole of opening up the whole town hall to have 5 people meet. So those sort of things were kind of what spurred it. Not really about moving it there, but I was thinking about the synergy. I like Sid a lot, but I actually thought literally the opposite of what his
Sid
comment
said.
was, that it really is about the synergy. And when garden suburbs like this were originally built, there were a lot of common concepts, and they usually did have that sort of main area. There was more quiet, secluded residential area, which we kind of have. It just so happened that this chapel ended up over here, and we're used to it, so it's not a problem for us. But there is the potential for a benefit. But I always thought, like, and it was pointed out to me a couple times in past years, that it's going to be hard for a lot of people to really think about it until they can kind of see it. Like what would it look like there? What would it include to really consider it? Because it might be surprising that you like it. I still think it would be a pretty long shot and a pretty high bar to clear for Jerry Lee and others. But that was the reason for thinking it. So it's like, if we're going to spend a lot of time on it and really try to do this right for 40, 50 years to really make it last, like, let's not have the regret that, hey, what if we we could have done something else. So, and it's a pretty small percentage, I think, of the overall report to kind of like study that and at least have that as a data point.
So one of the things that we're gonna have to consider after we get these 4 concepts, so this is like 2 or 3 steps from now. One of the things we have to consider is how much use do we want for town hall? To what extent are we trying to suppress the use of it because we want it to stay available all the time versus what appetite do we have? Maybe we are open to having additional. I remember early on in my time on the council, Jack was spearheading when we put together the rental rates. And I don't know if that was a year-long discussion, but it was very long. And one of the big questions was how many people do we really want coming in here? How busy do we want it? And so that's definitely something that we'll need to take into consideration down the road.
And in the charrette and in a lot of the comments I read that
Mhm.
people wanted it to be an internal amenity for the town as opposed to a money-making venture for the public is something that people said a lot. So I think that's important to keep
I
in
don't
mind.
think anybody said, yeah, no, I don't remember anybody making a point that it should be like a big revenue gainer from
Right.
outside, but then that kind of leads to that big gap. Like we'd have a pretty substantial renovation cost and not a lot payback on it. So
So
yeah, it might
that
be the
may be
same.
a driver for what we ultimately decide of which kind of concept, which direction to go. So, but that's a question for another day.
Right.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just a quick one as a clarification point. Well, 2 of things. Do we have to get permission from county historic preservation if we make any modifications to this building or do anything with it?
Has to go under historic area work permit for anything we do in the front.
So anything we do to the front of the building,
Yeah, well,
We'll
for
need
the
a
historic building in general. but
historic.
The whole
They're
building,
mostly gonna look at
if
the
I
front.
can.
Sorry, go ahead, Barb.
Yeah,
Yes.
Donna is sending comments through the chat, so I just want to make sure that I convey them as she
Please.
requested. Jared Lee had made some comments a few moments ago, essentially agreeing with Phil's point that you would both rather, if there's a need, explore it on the Penn Place side and leave this building where it is. And Donna wanted me to share that she concurs with both Phil and Jared Lee. I think in response to the question about does it need to make, and Lisa, whether the building, she's just questioning whether or not we really should expect it to make a lot of money off of town hall. And is that really what its purpose is to generate revenue, or is it
Agreed.
more of a community amenity?
Agreed.
Mhm.
Are you guys okay with punting that question? I mean, that's not what we're trying to do here tonight, is decide or to make a declaration about how much we want it to be used. Go ahead, Jared.
I'm so sorry, but I just wanted to quick finish one.
Oh,
There's
sorry.
2 parts of that question, because the
Yes.
second part of the question was an investigation. Is it possible to run by county historic pres to see what they would think if we decided to pick up the building and move it? Like, would they immediately shoot that down? Because if they say they were going to, then there's no sense in us spending money to do a study on it if we know that it's
A non-starter.
non-starter.
Yeah.
That's a good,
And Donna, Chris Keller actually posted in the chat as well, just a reminder that historic preservation would need to approve any exterior changes or location of the building. I could certainly approach the staff. Obviously, that's just going to be kind of a staff advisory opinion. I don't know to what extent they would weigh in on that, but I can certainly shoot an email to them tomorrow.
Thanks.
that's a great point, Phil. I'm sad I didn't think of that. Sorry about that. Jared Lee.
Question for Stephen. Are the empty lots within the historic area, the district?
I believe so.
Okay,
Yeah.
so any new construction would also be subject, right, to
Yeah,
the
but this
county
building's
review?
individually listed and the county master has.
Right,
regardless
I
of where it
totally
is, yeah.
understand that about this
Yeah,
building. I was
yeah.
just, I hadn't thought about
Yeah,
near
that would
Penn
be-
Place.
yeah.
I think it's perfectly within our scope tonight to set some basic objectives.
Mhm.
And if we feel like we already have a consensus about whether making or having a revenue source increase or revenue stream increase is an objective or not, is within scope of our conversation tonight.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, Barb.
I'm just once again relaying comments from Donna.
Please.
She just wanted everyone to know, she does need to step away for a bit. She wanted me to convey that she does not want to see this building moved. And for me to text her if there's anything that we need.
Okay. All right. Jerry, I like where you're going with this and moving forward. So, okay. So you're asking, what does that look like?
To me, if I were gonna phrase it, I would think it to be something along the line of, one of the objectives would be to increase the rentability or usability by other groups or by groups in general that may end up paying money. But if we just say increase the usability of the building, and Stephen, you may have a better way of phrasing that, then that would accomplish the objective of possible, getting more revenue out of it. Because we're trying to basically come up with a more flexible. We want to increase the flexibility and the usability so more people would want to use the building. Now, who they are is a different story. How much we charge is a totally different story, but nevertheless, I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah. So if we're opening up that discussion, what I would say is what I read a lot in the comments and kind of tend to agree with is, like Phil said, a lot of people are interested for their purposes of renting it for a wedding or for the town musical or any kind of other event that has typically occurred here. They'd like the usability. Film Society, Jack, thank you. They'd like to see the functionality and usability improved. And if that increases interest from outsiders to rent it, so be it. We can't control that, right? Other than by setting our pricing structure.
Mhm.
I see revenue as a side benefit.
Not
That
the
is
driver.
great, but not the driver. Yeah.
And that seemed to be the consensus back when we had that discussion that people didn't mind it, but they didn't want that to be, we weren't really doing it to market it. And
So we're not putting a carousel?
no.
Oh,
well,
get
you
shot
can't
down.
have
Like
left
that
and
little ones,
right.
Can't have a disco carousel.
I-
Only if it's historic.
Oh. No.
I would vote for the ice cream shop.
Oh, my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah, I would vote for that.
Oh, boy.
Regarding historic, I was thinking that would be if the Excel scheme was considered or studied a little bit, I was thinking that would be one of the things the architect would do first off, is have those discussions, kind of see what was involved in it. But if we can short circuit it and see, probably be good to find out if they have a strong opinion on it. I tend to guess that they wouldn't mind moving it. Like if you said you were going to take it away completely, they would say absolutely not. If you were going to take it from very planned location, if it was planned in the original plan and you were going to move it in between two houses, they would surely say no too. I think they would be open to doing it the other way, but I don't know for sure. But it would definitely wouldn't make sense if they could tell you to, for sure that they're not going to be able to entertain it. But I would be surprised if they said that. So
Okay. So what else do we need to nail down?
well, the other components, right? The
All the other
bathrooms,
components,
bathrooms,
everything else.
So far, I hear two options that we've explored, the high end and the lowest end.
Okay.
I haven't heard much about the middle.
Well, that's because they're between the high and the low. I mean, so I guess,
I could jump in with one
Please.
area that I saw in the comments that
Sure,
I'd like to
please.
explore. The heating and cooling center for the concern of emergencies and potential climate change. I think that's a nice middle one to consider. Or high end. It depends. Like, I don't know if it's high or middle because it's really about air conditioning, heating,
sure,
additional resilience, right?
but it could be explored as a geothermal issue.
Well, it could be, the real deal on that to me is just the generator. But one thing is, former Mayor Benjamin and I had a discussion about that a while ago, and he brought up the point that if it's called a heating and cooling center, then we have to meet certain things, requirements and so forth. If it happens to have a generator and people walk in the door, then it's probably different. But as soon as we call it, we want to formally call it a heating and cooling center, then we're going to be required to meet certain, standards and so forth for that type of area. But I would think it would make perfect sense to put a standby generator in, and that would only probably cost in the neighborhood. I'm just guessing, but that's probably like a $20,000 price tag or 40,000.
But. So I can tell you.
But,
I,
right, okay, so, and there we go. But that would not make a huge change in some of the things that would be done as far as the HVAC. It's basically just providing an alternate source of power.
Right.
So it's a bolt-on
I think,
modular
yes, I
option.
think that's something that we should ask be included.
It's worth considering
Yes.
and exploring whether that's actually true or not today, because it could also provide a source of grants. There are lots of infrastructure grants right now that are aimed at climate resilience. And
It-
so they could pay for
And
themselves.
so while it could be more difficult and higher hurdles to,
It might be worth it
It might be-
because if we could get a grant that covered that additional cost, it might be worth it.
I mean, I'm definitely in favor of putting a backup generator in, especially for town
absolutely.
resiliency.
I think that goes in the basic option, really.
You're right, that should go in the basic option. I agree, because if we had an extended power failure, and we've had them in the past, knock on wood, we haven't had one recently. But it would be great the town offices could then be able to be moved to some extent, maybe over here. You know, and that actually could be part of the resiliency thing, is that how would we set up the building to allow a move temporarily over to this building
for
if-
functionality
for
of government.
functionality if something happened, heaven
Continuity.
forbid, a fire or some other calamity occurred.
Yeah.
But
Sure.
I'm
Yeah.
in agreement with you as far as if we could do a cooling center, do it something formally, sure.
Jerry Lee, you're on a roll. You're coming up with all the stuff that
I read it in the comments from the public.
bathrooms. I mean, I think that's a question.
I think it's a must, because we have a lot of small children in town. We have a lot of senior citizens in town. We really need, I think this facility's got to have real, pure,
Like,
accessible,
Truly accessible.
legitimately accessible bathrooms. And when the ones that we have were redone, I think it was 20-ish years ago, or maybe 25. It was kind of when ADA was relatively new. And it's a pretty big burden on a lot of public facilities to be able to make places accessible. So some of the things were accepted when they were kind of close enough, but these are not even close to accessible. So, and it's not a huge cost in doing a, significant renovation like this. And once you do any kind of significant renovation, you don't have a choice anyway. So it's been decades since you could kind of be close.
So that brings us back around, I think, to a question of historic and what does it mean? Do we want, what is the front face of it that is historic that we want to preserve? Is that addition where the bathrooms are was not there until fairly recently. So any objection to either saying automatically, yeah, let's get rid of that because it's not historic versus
Just for the benefit of the record, what year was that addition?
I think it was the 50s that was put on, was back when it was a church, might have been 50s or 60s, maybe.
So that was
Do you-
changed
do you
before it
remember
became
when the
town hall.
bathrooms were put on? I think you had it in your research.
I,
Yeah. 50s probably. Yeah.
Someone will need to repeat what Sue was saying, or can you come to the mic?
what did Dave Almy said?
Dave Almy was instrumental in getting the permits, and the one bathroom was considered handicapped accessible then when it was put in, and he got special permission. I think he sweet talked people to only have a small bathroom in the front, so we could have two.
Yeah, he was able to do that because ADA was relatively new back then. Like you can't do that anymore.
Do you remember when that was?
He told me it was like 98 or 2000, something like that, I think. So, but the bathrooms are older than that. That addition is
Talking that addition.
that addition, I think, is from the 50s. And then he renovated inside of it.
Gotcha.
because in the picture from 1973 shows it there,
Right.
so. it's
Does
definitely
that,
older than that.
Jerry Lee, does it matter to you if it was there before this became town hall? I mean, does that,
Well, I think that's a factor. I was curious if during the early stages of this conversation, did you consult with the county historic staff and did they make any comments about that? Or was that just an idea that kind of came out of
No,
the charrette?
there's an idea I had going into the charrette, and I think it's something that's pretty basic for doing in a report like this. Usually you get that's why you get an architect that has historic preservation knowledge, is they'll figure out what are the core historic areas and they would mark all those. It would be this, it's really 3 rooms. It's this room or 4, this room, the former altar, the piano room and the entry room. And everything else is all addition, including the bathroom. So they would mark those separately.
So say that again. It's the stage, what's essentially the stage, this room, the space directly lateral to where we are right now,
Yeah.
and then the little entryway.
Yeah, and they'll basically do something like this one drawing that shows it where it's green is the historic, what was built in 1896 or 7, and everything else came later. I think it was the 40s and 50s. But that's usually one of the big benefits of doing a study like that, is you weigh the pros and cons of it. Is it a contributing addition or is it a non-contributing addition? And then you weigh the pros and cons of keeping it. Is it better to keep it because it could be used for bathrooms or closet or something else up there, reception or coats, or do you take it, or what are the pros of putting it back the way it was? And to me, I think one of the values would be you would be upgrading your electric anyway. So there was a window where the electric is, so it would brighten up that room a lot. It would put the building potentially back to what it looked at. And I think a lot of people had, when they heard that, they had reservations, assuming that like they're just used to the bathrooms here, like you wouldn't have them, but you would actually have proper ones somewhere else in the building. And I think it would be beneficial to have them more secluded than right here. I think it's kind of a little bit
Awkward.
odd when you see people coming out of the bathroom. It could be a little bit embarrassing. So usually when you design a building from scratch, we never do this. So it's just the building was designed in 1890s without a bathroom. I guess the church must have figured people would.
Okay, but I don't want to go back to that.
Yeah.
I want there to be a bathroom.
Yeah,
We agree.
so there's just a lot of things in this town just happen because of the way history kind of ebbed and flowed. So it was a town with a very specific plan, and it just never really worked out strategically, or not in succession to really fully be fit out. It just kind of changed.
Have we officially asked our town historic preservation committee if they have a consensus opinion on that question?
About the whether to take off that addition.
Right, whether to restore that facade to the original.
I think it was mixed.
Chapel.
We talked about it a bunch, but there wasn't any real like decision on it. So a lot of these different concepts were talked back and forth, and it was mixed.
I mean, it seems to me, if it's not too much of an effort to at least, put that in with the same category of relocation as an option to get a conceptual level, rough order of magnitude for the cost. I have no problem with that. I don't feel any great pull or draw for us to restore that facade, other than there is maybe some functionality reasons to move the bathrooms anyway. And if we're going to do that, then that certainly makes restoring the facade maybe, we're not trying to keep those bathrooms there. And so we're not giving up something that's, that's a huge value for us, right? No one said, oh, the bathrooms must be right by the front door.
A couple.
Well, a few people did,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's not something that was like across all of the comments we
Yeah.
got.
But there were some people really attached to it. But
I mean, I'm just saying, like, as an option, I'm
Yeah.
not, I don't feel like I'm decided on that particular question. But I wouldn't want to invest a lot of money in exploring
oh,
it.
you wouldn't know. Yeah, and it would be just kind of one of those things that goes in succession of the reports. There's, looking at that aspect, there's looking at the windows, looking at the roof, and then you kind of weigh all those together and come up with a plan. So
Is there a, so it's not automatic that we want to keep it. It's not automatic that we want to cut it off. So we want.
yeah, and I don't think you should make that kind of decision anyway.
don't
That's the
necessarily
point of having a report is you.
Understood.
And then I think it will probably lend itself into landing different ways in different studies. So if you have, say, one study that's looking at what do you do with the full footprint of this building as it is, and really making an interior renovation plus, just rehabilitate the exterior in the current shape, that could be one option, but if you're looking at another option, maybe put storage and mechanical and so on
Underneath.
beneath it. It wouldn't really make any sense to spend a lot of money on taking a fifties addition, lifting that, taking it all apart and lifting it up versus, paring the building back down to its, 4 original components and then putting those on a new foundation and building new proper foundations around everything else. So I think those kind of things would lend themselves to kind of being, in a option 2 and 3, say.
I have a question. Do
Yeah.
we want to pursue or discuss or include in one of these concepts any expansion other than a lower level for mechanical and storage? Do we want to think about putting something on top for any use or purpose? Or are we fine with the size and the footprint of and the usability of the space as it is?
Well, so we'll be limited. We'll have the same limitations in terms of footprint and floor area ratio, right? I mean,
Not necessarily because it's not a residential building, so
Okay.
our code's not really covering,
restrictive.
on commercial buildings, but it's on here because this one's on a residential lot, which just happens to be a non-residential use. So it probably could be something that could be worked through. Can't remember if this even met our residential number. I think it did, but was close. But
Okay.
as far as doing an addition, I think it would be fruitful to look at something that looks at like if we didn't expand but reused all the building that exists here, but in a more thoughtful manner, it would be one thing. But then the other thing would be like if you looked at it as if you took the back, let's say, down to the original components and then envision what would the town need if it was starting from scratch? Like, would it be a smaller committee room or a room that's better acoustics or whatever it could be? It could be like a little room for 4. What are the components that would make sense? A different type of kitchen, and then figure out how those would fit in the back. And then we probably would need to keep it on one level, but we wouldn't have to. The big issue is I think it would be really hard to get anything past Montgomery County Historic if it tucked out the sides or above this building. So you're most likely looking at something that's 1 story, and plus also if you go to 2 stories, then you need that elevator back.
Right.
So
I'm just asking if the
Mhm.
concept should be pretty much using the existing footprint and just moving walls around inside to accommodate our use.
But we would be able without it. If we were to take off the additions that were put on there, sort of Frankenstein-like,
Mhm.
we could take those down and put new in that same place, but in better configuration and more thoughtfully done. If that,
and you most likely would be able to make them bigger than what it is now too. And then I don't think there would be anything necessarily holding us back from saying if it was decided like maybe it makes sense to shift the building up 5 feet, or I doubt it would be the case, but move it back 5 feet. There probably wouldn't be that much standing in the way of that sort of thing too. If it was kind of saying like it's, crowding the backyard too much to fit that program there, maybe it makes more sense to move it up a little bit. Like one of the people had comments on, I think it was Doug Mader had that comment too, would it make sense to shift it up a little bit so it's not so tucked back? Because we don't really even use, like very rarely I ever see anybody use the front yard other than like attic in the street. But my guess is it was built back from the street originally as like a after services gathering space. That's just a guess, but we just don't really use it. I think when people use the outdoor space, they're getting bit by bugs like I was out in the back. So,
Just a question.
But I guess along with that, we could theoretically even expand the building out the back a few feet if we so found the need without too much of a problem. I could understand going up could be an issue. Going down in a basement, I would think may not be much of an issue only because you can't see it. But going back, I'm assuming, I don't know, that we should be able to go back a few feet if we desired. Or like you said, even
Yeah.
move the building up and then go back a bit.
yeah, I think we'd have a pretty decent amount of, like, we wouldn't be able to cover half the lot, but we would be able to get, I think, something that's markedly bigger than what's back there, if that's determining what makes sense. And something I had always thought about it before is I always, for some reason, I guess it just because that addition we have back there is so flat and the ceilings are so low. The addition we have in the back is so flat and the ceilings are so low. I always thought about making it a nicer looking and a nicer layout of that space, but I kept thinking about it as something that's shorter. But realistically, this building is pretty tall. So if the HOP process, looking at historic preservation view, is really going to be concerned about what you see from the street. There could be something that's in the back that has vaulted ceilings that maybe is a really nice acoustical space, a really like a beautiful space. It could be taller. I just realized like yesterday, I think it was, I kept thinking about it as like really pretty small rooms, but it could be a really pretty medium or a larger room too. So
Maybe a piano room.
yeah, something that's just a different purpose maybe than what
Yes.
this is.
A
Mhm.
separate kind of ceiling. Yeah.
Yeah, so something that kind of, connects to the garden, say.
So I just want to, we're at 8:25 right now and we're not, no need to wrap this up right now, but I just want to ask a couple questions. So once we do this request for proposals and we pick a firm and then whoever we pick gives us a range of options or gives us 4 options of small, medium, large, extra large, we're not stuck with choosing one of those 4. Because the next step is we can mix and match and say, well, I really like this element and I really like this element. And here's the size of the project that we want to do. Like we want the size of the medium project, but we want this particular element from this large project. Like we're not committing to anything in particular, right? I mean, we'll still, there's a lot more negotiations and mix and matching, right?
Yeah, it's really meant to stretch the imagination, and it's almost always becomes a hybrid between
Right.
different schemes.
Okay.
You find like, I like the approach to the building out of this one,
Mhm.
but the functionality of the other one.
Right.
so.
And I want a generator for that one. Yeah, it's
Right.
mix and match.
Good. Just wanted to make sure that we're not,
We'll have
tying our-
we'll have the benefit of a scope of work and a budget to
Yes.
help us make those decisions, which is
Yes.
what we're missing now.
Right.
yeah. So the next step after we're done with our discussion is that we will turn this over to Barb, who will then incorporate what we've said. And then we'll start asking, put it out for bid. And then that bid process typically is what, 30 days? A deadline of 30 days beyond?
We would want at least 4 weeks, I think.
Okay,
That's usually I don't think you want firms to disqualify themselves just because of
not enough time.
timing.
Yeah, sure.
Mm.
Is there another revision that comes back or once we hand it off to you?
I would like to circulate it, actually, if you don't mind. I've been
No, of
trying to
course.
sort of take not just my own notes for minutes purposes. If I can share the screen and if you all can tell me if I've captured what were your key components. I was trying to make sure that people at home could also kind of follow
Have
along.
that benefit. Please, thank you.
Okay, so the things that I had that you wanted included in the RFP is to explore different levels of kitchen upgrades and the associated.
Were you going to
costs.
share it?
See it, are
Oh,
you able to
otherwise-
share it up there? It might be a matter of.
No, Melissa? It worked the other day when we were doing this. It said I'm screen sharing.
You share, it should come up on the other for the meeting.
There it is. I see it. Oop,
Oh.
it just went away. You had it and then it went away.
That's only about sharing.
Yeah, do you mind? Yeah, it's saying participants can now see it. But it's not showing.
Click on this one. And then stop share. And then do it again.
Yeah, Chris Keller is saying they can all see it. You guys can't. Okay.
Mhm.
It's great.
All right. So if we can't though, if you can't share the screen,
Well, the people at home can see it.
Oh,
can
good.
they?
Yeah,
Okey-doke.
they're weighing in saying that they're.
Oh,
able-
okay.
There we go.
Here it is.
There it
There
is.
we go.
Delay.
All right.
I just wanted to make sure that I captured your thoughts accurately, since this is sort of the foundation of the documents. So regarding the kitchen, I had noted that you wanted to explore different levels of kitchen upgrade and their associated cost. There was some discussion about highlighting the types of items that need to be stored in this building. Kind of share that with whoever the bidders are, but not necessarily specify a solution, that you wanted to allow different design creativity on the part of the firms. There seemed to be a consensus that you did want the RFP to include as a must-have, opening up the rear of the building to increase usability of the space.
Of the outdoor space?
I meant more from this part back,
Okay.
basically, that there were too many walls and that you wanted to,
Yeah,
is that correct?
too many little rooms.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes,
right,
I would,
sorry.
I would just
I
maybe add
misread.
to your note, interior,
Right.
rear of the,
Or, okay. I would-
rear of the interior. or something.
I will do that. You wanted to explore a generator installation?
Mhm.
Could we clarify that? I really feel strongly, and I think Phil does as well, that that is a basic minimum requirement, not
I would,
to be
I mean, I would vote for as a minimum requirement.
if it has
for
to
sure.
go outside inside a container, so be
Yeah.
it.
Well, and I had a question. We've been having some internal discussions as a staff, just within the last week, Kayla and I've been discussing, and George, actually trying to pursue getting a generator at Penn Place, since that's where the offices are. There's the post office. So I guess part of the thinking is, I do agree that one of our buildings should basically have a generator. But should it be this building, or should it be
Both.
Both.
both?
Both.
Okay,
Mhm.
Why not both?
okay. So do you want that to be a mandatory provision in terms of someone coming up
I
with design
personally would-
cost?
Would go
Is
for
there-
mandatory that we do
Okay, it
that.
seems like there's a majority of you. Is that correct?
I'll just say plan generator installation then.
Right. I can't change
Generator
screen
space.
shading, but I will change that. I was a little lost in this part of your discussion, so please tell me if I didn't capture it correctly. It seemed like you wanted to explore options both based on the existing building footprint, but also some options with the removal of the non-historic additions. Is that correct? And
Yeah.
I think as part of your discussion, you also talked about possibly taking down the non-historic additions and possibly rebuilding additions, but those would be more functional perhaps and more consistent with the historic nature of the building. Did I
Mhm.
capture that correctly?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
It's pretty much a base of doing this kind of report.
Right, and then I think just the more a reminder that basically of all these options, you really wanted to sort of have a mix and match and know what the cost implications were of everything that's being reviewed.
But I think we also want to upgrade the electrical sprinkler, fire protection,
Yeah, we need it to be a safer building.
HVAC,
Right, if I just
you know,
generally,
all the components.
all the structural components and basically obviously address any kind of code deficiencies in the building as they exist today, as opposed to perhaps in 2015. Is that
Right, and
Those
it
two
might end up
ones.
triggering.
correct?
Is
There's
there
two
something
important
that's
ones.
missing?
There's two important ones. So
Okay,
kind of what in Lisa said is that I think there's been concern over the years about the structure below this. It's a really tight crawl space. And then that was one of the things I think Phil and I were talking about a few years ago, is that there would be a benefit of having a basement option to at least look at that, because then all that lumber would be visible and workable for the town staff. The other thing with the systems that, you know, just like Jack was saying with AV equipment, it's good to kind of have flexibility and be able to keep up to date. A lot of stuff has just changed in the last couple of years and it's changing a lot now on HVAC. It's a lot less emphasis on fuel burning and more going towards electrical systems that it really wasn't even the case.
Yeah, we might
just 2
not
years
even be
ago.
able to
So-
get gas if the, by the
Yeah.
time we get there, the county might say we can't even do it. But, and Wi-Fi and media technology, acoustics, the windows are all gonna have to be glazed or somebody's gonna do something with the windows. So.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
we have to
that's
meet
all.
energy code.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
there's a
all
lot
stuff
of-
that's gonna be, the part of the preservation
Right.
aspect is,
Mhm.
is that'll be included.
So it all meets code and,
Yeah.
right.
I mean, I know this is. go
I
ahead.
was gonna say, would almost think we want to put the basement as something we have to do. I mean, unless the foundation of the building is considered really good. I would think
It's been considered bad.
that's what it's been considered bad. That's my understanding of it too. And so for that reason, if we're going to replace it, there's no sense in putting the crawl space in. When putting in a full basement, so I might as well just make it just like the the generator should be something we do, put in a full basement,
And then put all the equipment in storage.
Oh,
down
definitely.
there. Right.
definitely.
Okay, so you're saying that all the options should
Should
have
include a
a
full basement.
foundation with a basement?
Yeah, because the foundation's not that great to begin with, and what's the sense of putting in?
I mean, could we just ask them to give us a rough order of magnitude early, in an early phase of the exploration of
Mhm.
the difference of repairing the current foundation or, shoring up the current foundation versus a full basement?
Sure.
It just seems to me it could possibly be a big difference, but I'm not
Okay.
sure. I did
Fair
put in a basement in my house and it was a pretty big difference for us.
Excuse me, fair enough.
But yours was done the hard way too.
It was done the hard way, yes.
Yeah, but it's.
So we don't want to say that it's not it's not an absolute yes, the way a generator is. But we want to know the difference.
Right.
We want it to know the options.
Yeah, maybe if the RFP could demonstrate some, have some phases and we get some of those early decision points sorted out with some really conceptual information, and then they could explore further. Perhaps it becomes a definite
Mhm.
based on that early information.
That's where they lend themselves to like falling into different early schemes or options, and then you end up going with a hybrid. You might say, we really like the third from the bottom option, but we can't afford this piece of it. So why don't we do that the way it was done in number 2, but do everything else at number 3? And that could be something just like the basement. Maybe you end up not having a basement because you can't afford it, and you put a crawl space in. But then like you do the scheme that shows a crawl space around what you would keep with the crawl space and not changing the foundation. And you look at the one with the basement and what would you do if you were going to be doing the heavy excavation anyway? Like you would, like I was saying earlier, you wouldn't keep the 1950s addition. You would go back to 1897 and then build out from there again. So like those kind of things will come out as components in this. So just like the kitchen, I think it would be good too with the kitchen in your notes, Barb, to make sure that it's understood not different levels of kitchen as far as levels of fancy finish, but more different functionality. Is it a warming kitchen versus a food service kitchen or a demonstration kitchen that's in between?
Right.
And I guess one thing I would throw in about the basement for a moment, but actually with a lot of these things, is that they should consider future upgradability. In other words, well, the basement would be, I know Jerry Lee, you guys did it, where you put a basement into a house that's this old or older. But what I'm thinking is something like a basement we might want to consider, but we cut off some other option and we do that later because we can do that later
Phases.
in phases. So exactly.
Right. And it may be much more affordable to put a basement in this building because it's not occupied during the construction, right? So, you could jack it up and do the basement,
Yeah.
not the way we did where we lived with it. But, I think it's
Sure.
worth just getting a little bit of design rough order information first before we decide.
Okay.
So
And then Barb, you were gonna also find out about the historic
Right.
preservation
will.
and what we can and can't do.
is there any,
It's one of the things she should include is the concept of moving the building to a different lot that. we
oh
have
yeah,
for
yeah, put
lots
that on
of
there
the
too.
other-
Yeah.
As a rough order
Yeah,
option.
Assuming that the county doesn't absolutely say no.
Mix it.
right.
I'll just stress in there that would be a really high level option. We really just need a 3D view and really quick sketched out plans just to kind of see the what if, not spend a lot of time on it, because I think everything else would be, a new addition built on the back of here versus next to it somewhere else is not going to be that much different. And all the treatment of the historic parts of it are going to be the same and most of, if not all the schemes. So it's really isolating that variable.
And if we're able to get a basement where we can put the HVAC stuff and all that stuff down there, and then we have more workable space up here.
Mhm.
Yeah, but then even with HVAC, a lot of stuff, it's a little bit potentially less need for equipment now. You may not need a boiler. If it's a heat pump, maybe that could be done a different way. So
Right.
that's part of what they would be studying, is proposing different mechanical systems and telling you what are the pros and cons of each. Like, because some of them might be better from a historic preservation standpoint to not have equipment out on the ground, not have noise, but they might be better cost, or there might be some that are more efficient than others. So you would be able to kind of see all the pluses and minuses of each one and figure out what's the best. So.
Is there anything else glaring that we need to discuss for this? And while we're thinking, I just want to say, maybe I'm wrong, but I think this is the first time that as a council, we've actually talked about this and we've actually made plans like ever to say, now we're really moving forward. And I think that's a really big deal. That I remember Jack you were in charge of the renovation when you were council, yeah? Wasn't that one? I think that was one of your, exactly. And that's my same thing as I say, yeah, I was on the council, Jack handed it off to me. Yeah, kind of. So this has really been in the works not in the works, but this has been a thing we've talked about it for many, many years. And so I'm really proud of us for actually saying, let's truly move this forward. So I think, yay, good on us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mayor, before we move over, I've made some changes. Can I just pop this on the screen one more time just to
Please.
see if I captured everything? And now we know there'll be a delay. So I added addressing the code deficiencies, upgrading the systems, just added some notes for myself about the kitchen, that it's more functional use of the space rather than finishes. Is this letting me do this? Basically I did explore full basement installation versus only foundation repair work and crawl space work. That's what I understood. Obviously, this will be worded better in an RFP than I'm doing right now. Open up the building interior at the rear to increase usability. I put the generator as a must-have, as a reminder to myself. And then just added the note about if permissible by HPC, basically explore a high-level option of moving the building to another town-owned site.
Or should have the ADA.
Is that not an obvious?
It's
Or an
kind
automatic?
of in there automatic, but just with the basement especially, like what are our possibilities of using that space?
In
I
terms
guess
of-
it is
Without
pretty
it
obvious,
being accessible to the
Yeah.
public.
Yeah, I will say when I was working up in Westminster, the library there had their basement basically building as a commercial kitchen, oddly enough, since you've been talking about it. That also triggered having an exterior exit from the space so that there were at least two ways. So I think your point about defining what is public
Mhm.
is important.
Yeah.
Is there anything that I've overlooked that you all have talked about?
Do we want to say something to the effect of we want to upgrade all the wiring and plumbing? Because I mean, we know the plumbing is old, we know the wiring is old.
I think those are
Or those gotta
pretty
be,
essential.
Yeah.
All around.
Something I always had in the drafts of RFP that we didn't really talk about tonight, but I think we'd all agree on is a high level concept for the exterior spaces too, like how that relates to the building. I think we're gonna want to see that. Yeah, the garden and the front and the back, like
But you know,
that makes sense.
outdoor
thinking
rooms.
about what Ken Rabin mentioned, exterior sprinklers on the roof might not be triggered by code, but if there were a fire at one of the neighboring houses, that could protect this building.
Okay. Stephen, would you mind repeating what you were saying about the front landscaping and the back landscaping of the space?
I guess maybe the clearer way to probably say it is that we want to explore what the site options are, like the site and landscaping options are. So you'd have to make a true accessible lead up to the building. There may be a second one to go around to the side door and or the back door, those kind of things. So,
Are you saying the cracked pavers out front are we can't keep
yeah,
those?
and that and
Oh.
the slope and the railing or lack thereof, and
Yeah, I know the town arborist did email me, I think after seeing the mayor's communication yesterday about some thoughts he had just about ripping up the azalea bushes and some other things. So he would like
Yeah.
this explored as well.
I think Butch brought that up to me
Yeah.
years ago. It was really difficult to maintain the front of the building because some of that vegetation's just gotten so large. But I meant to note it earlier, just in general. I think Butch and George and Frank did a wonderful job with this building because it was really like some of that siding, it's not original, and that's why it was crumbling. It's kind of like newer, cheaper wood because it was replaced at some point. But they did a really great job of making this, fixed up to kind of hold down the fort, for a couple of years. And we did the same thing with the roof. Like I was up there with Frank several years ago, and it's good. Everything's kind of like watertight and looking good. So this can really be studied to, for, you know, for the long term.
Yeah, I did want to add, I know George does have concerns about the exterior of this building, and wanting that to be a project in the near term. So with your concurrence, I'd like to put something in there just so that is factored into any kind of renovation project in terms of cost.
It would be and the roof,
Right.
Absolutely.
yeah.
And I'm gonna, Stephen, I think well, I don't know, I guess Stephen, Lisa may know more about this than I, but would we want to try and aim towards a LEED certified design? Or upgrade, or is that, okay, you gave me the answer.
High-end option.
And I got my answer, I think.
Worth looking at. It could open up grant opportunities again.
Right, I mean, we could look at it, I just,
Okay.
Harry Gordon used to be on the board, but I don't know if he still is. Do you know if is he still or
Is
on
Harry
the, on the lead board? Yeah. But yeah, it could be a beneficial, and even a lot of public buildings, what they would do is do things that would meet LEED, but just not spend the money to get the certification, but
Right.
just have the satisfaction that you did those approaches. So, you know, both of those are there's a lot of money in putting together all the paperwork that
Right.
it takes to get that.
Gas are
Mhm.
gonna be a big one.
Yeah, and if we do renewable energy, so on and so forth, there's a lot of different things you could trade off. Different points.
Pretty a while ago. And for one house, it was a pretty big house. It's about a 10,000 square foot house. We had to dig 650 feet to get enough enough piping under the frost line to make it work.
Yep.
And the Washington Monument is only 550 feet tall.
Yep.
So I was kind of always astounded by that. So
Okay.
anyway.
we have gas here now, don't we, or am I wrong?
Yeah, there's
What
a
do you say?
gas stove here, isn't
I think it's a gas furnace. too.
Gas,
No, it's electric.
it's a gas furnace, though, isn't
Yeah.
it? Now, if we have gas now, does that, if we're doing a renovation, would that mean that we'd still be able to keep the gas? Or, yeah,
changing it so that nobody can continue to use gas. They're trying to get everybody to go to electric.
I think if we were in California, we couldn't do it now.
Right.
In Maryland, you still can, but who
Right.
knows what it's gonna be.
Yeah, I think
in the
it's
future,
for
too.
new construction, but it could be triggered with this kind of substantial renovation.
All right,
okay.
I wanna,
The architects will know about that.
Yeah.
are we
For the
okay if
engineers.
Yeah.
are we okay if we wrap this up?
Okay.
Yeah? Ah, excellent, wonderful, wonderful. The time is 8:50. We're moving on to talking about the town office renovation.
Yeah.
So one of the things, let me grab my stuff. Barb has asked that, for our, I don't know if it's permission, but if we are willing to grant latitude, can you explain this, Barb? I don't want to make it sound like you're.
No, what I was saying to Joanna is I think the most important takeaway that I need this evening is direction from the group in terms of what space, if any, do you want to expand the town office in, and what spaces do you want to pursue rental? Because I think that is the critical decision, I think, at this juncture. I think once that decision is made, what I'd like the latitude to do is to go back to Lumber and Light and maybe have some conceptual drawings based on that direction. As I said to Joanna, when Lumber and Light was doing its work, there has been a change, and basically Joanna did not feel as strongly that she needed an office space. That was not a
Or at least
parameter.
not a
Well,
large,
you didn't
like-
need, not a large office
Right.
space. That was not the parameters that were given to Lumber and Light at the time they did their work.
And also I was kind of bothered by the idea of the town what is your title?
Manager. Yep.
Town manager and the assistant all sharing a space. I just think that's difficult to conduct business and make phone calls and have meetings, and so I'd rather have two
Right.
smaller offices than one
Right.
shared
So-
space.
So the question is, after what we decide tonight, is of what space are we going to expand into previously rented space? Are we not going to? Are we comfortable then just letting Barb move on and basically handle it herself and figure out what the inside is going to look like? Like how much do we need to have our fingerprints on this?
Well, I
once we
think-
decide that piece.
I think Barb wrote to Black Market and they are interested in
Right.
more space. So that's good to know. We already leased.
Well, so
the-
they didn't say that they wanted more space. They were interested in hearing what it would cost and what
Right.
the space would be
Right.
like. Yeah.
And if I can add one other thing, I'm also trying to, Donna is back online now. And certainly I think by asking for latitude, it's important to me, for example, like, let's just say you want to incorporate tenant space A, but you want us to pursue rental of tenant space B. Just using that hypothetically, are there parameters even within incorporating tenant space A that you want to provide direction on, such as you want a conference room that seats 10 people? So I'd like to get as much direction from you as I can, but I do think some of these parameters have shifted from what Lumber and Light previously had to work with. And so I think I'd like to get them up to speed, but also whatever your direction is this evening. And certainly we can bring concept plans back to you. I'm just trying to convey that I don't need to know what color you want the walls painted this evening. I just need sort of the broad strokes, so at least we can narrow the field of what we're working with.
Yeah, and I wanted to say one thing about that space question. Which is, there's a lot of books in the entryway that were Barbara Schneider's garden books.
Mhm.
And I spoke to Susan Hargreaves, is the executive director of the nursing home where she is, and I spoke to Lizzie Glidden Boyle, who's a good friend of hers. And their thought was that we don't have to keep the books there. Like, I'm not sure they're really used. It's a lot of space. So maybe donating them or recapturing that space for some other use might be something that I would certainly want to pursue.
Could be a waiting area. Which
Could be any,
sometimes it was used that, but I've never seen anybody use the books.
right? And there's a lot of them.
So I don't think we want to capture that space for town office.
Right?
You know, like it wouldn't be a reception area like that. We wouldn't turn that into a reception because we would still have traffic from the tenants if we had those two front spaces being rented. So, but yes, it's nice to know that
I mean,
that's an
it's-
option
Right,
is
it's
to,
just space that's maybe
use.
available to do something else.
um.
Yeah,
One,
it's true. You probably couldn't use it unless it really was a dedicated floor.
right.
Unless you put a hall, but.
I didn't think to ask, I didn't think to ask the Arboretum Committee their thoughts about that, but I would want to, before we
About those books.
jettison the garden collection, because I do think that that's a kind of a special treasure.
Might be able
And,
to-
and I don't think just because Barbara doesn't care whether we keep it or not,
Doesn't
that's the
mean that
only
we-
reason.
Sure.
It is very much valued by our garden community.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just add that when I had the commercial real estate broker walk through the space, he commented on the same space just in terms of at a minimum, if we were going to be renting tenant space B, that it needs to be cleaned up and made
Right.
more professional in appearance.
Right.
Right, but that doesn't necessarily mean getting rid of the
It-
books.
He probably would have gotten rid of most of them. Like there's a whole, thing about how you organize bookshelves. And he was sort of conveying his opinion on that.
We need a little feng shuiing of
Yes.
the book room.
Well, I would agree with not getting rid of the books. I mean, I think that the books could be a valuable resource. Maybe they need to be relocated to somewhere else to make things better. And maybe eventually this building becomes the repository. I'm not sure, but
Okay. That sounds lovely. Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
So, but I think, I mean, is anybody interested in putting a hallway so that we can close that space off? Like, I don't know that, is that space one that we're including in this renovation? I guess that's the question. This retooling of the area
I think it's nice having an open lobby space that is not locked off from public too. I think that's another value that I appreciate about that space.
Okay, so,
Just a door off a hallway. It's a little bit of a space to stand outside the door. It's
Right.
kind of nice.
okay, so
Really-
it sounds to me like that's like, we're not touching that space.
Okay.
So we can decide what to do with it separately. But in terms of the scope of our discussion here, we're talking about
Yeah.
inside the current, not the current, but the current front of the offices, and then working toward the back. Are we, I guess, does Donna, by the way, have anything that she wants to share at the moment about this?
She does not have her hand up.
Okay.
She basically had just asked me what she missed, so I just emailed her my
Okay.
notes that I had put. on.
What I was gonna say is that I don't think we should preclude maybe sprucing it up a bit. Maybe we need better lighting or something. I mean, spending a little bit of money on it to kind of make it a little better, jazz it up a little bit.
Okay.
I think that that would be something we should
Mm,
throw into the
Make
pot.
some consistency with the rest of.
Yeah,
the-
you know, somehow if we're doing some theme, yeah.
Mhm.
and-
Okay.
Clean,
Cons-
organized.
Yeah, exactly.
Agreed. Barb, you got that?
Yep.
In terms of space, the options are we keep the exact footprint that we have now. There's the option of adding the space that used to be rented by Pat Keating. That's what we refer to as tenant space A. And then there's a smaller room that's more of a closet that is toward the front of that hall, that floor that we
Next to
referred
the
to.
space at Black Market rent.
Right, next to the space black market rents and right next to the elevator that we refer to as space B. Is there opposition? I guess I'm working from the assumption that we need space A. I have moved, or Frank has moved my desk into that space, and it's, it's just a little corner of a big room. But there is a large table that I think currently as it is seats maybe 6. Do we want a dedicated room? Do we want to put up walls and make a room in that space so that it's a private conference room versus just having it be sort of a somewhat segregated space within the bigger?
Depends on who's there. I think that there's definitely more full-time people now than there is the space that was designed, whatever it was, 20 years ago
Right.
to do it. So at the best, like you're probably one extreme of a mayor that doesn't need a grand office. There are others that wanted to be there all the time and wanted a big office. There are others that were there part-time. Before that, there was a flip-flop in between like Ted Pratt's office and what the
Right.
mayor's office was. I think it flipped back and forth a couple times. So there's varying opinions. So we probably need to plan in something that's for a mayor versus your preference or the previous
Absolutely.
mayor's
No question.
performances or preferences, but something that's reasonable for any mayor. But I think also like the functionality of it, probably makes sense. Like to consider it might be to something where one of those spaces is really more like when the mayor is there or there's committees there. Maybe it's a simple way to look at it is those kind of spaces come into play when the existing office may work most of the time just fine for a town manager, assisting town manager, and admin to kind of have the 3
Yep.
distinct spaces that are there. Could, especially if it's something that's short term. I know it's like a very low percentage that we might combine town office with town hall, but that was one of my thinkings is if there's like a lighter touch renovation to kind of get us through 2023, then we would know later in 2023, probably earlier in 2023, which is the direction on town hall. And if the door is going to close on ever combining those things, then,
Is one of
figure
the
out something more
concepts
permanent.
from town hall gonna be to accommodate office space from Penn Place into town hall? Cause I
Not
don't think
here.
right now that's part of the concept.
It hasn't
Before.
been before. I think it wouldn't make any sense here, but if, in the option that's over there, it could be something where you have the town office, the meeting hall and all that kind of
If we
thing
move it,
together. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's a low percentage, but if there's some chance that percentage comes out to be the favorable one in the end, then Like it would be a shame to spend a lot of money on the second floor pen place and then have to convert it back.
So I maybe made assumptions. Is there a consensus that we want to expand into that larger
A.
space?
Well, it sounds like the staff wants it and needs it, and.
Mhm.
Are we gonna keep the big table that's in where Elizabeth works now and then have another conference room in the back, or are we gonna reconfigure?
I think
Yeah, I think it's all open for discussion. I think what Lumber and Light envisioned was not having that large table there. Part of their design, and I can certainly bring it up if that would be helpful, was incorporating sort of a flex space. So like George right now has like a little corner unit, but
Right.
kind of a counter that's seating height. And then having a separate conference room was one of their options. Obviously, it's subject all to your direction.
I guess I'd say that, looking at the scenarios and the cost differences, they aren't as big as I was expecting between the options. And I would say we don't gain a lot by using tenant space B,
that smaller,
but
up
the
by
smaller one that's near the library and the elevator.
Yep.
And since our current tenants might be willing to rent that out, that it's a small space. I doubt it's very attractive to anyone else other than an add-on for an existing tenant. So to me, leaving B as something that we could rent out or use for storage when it's not rented out, but easily, storage in a way that we could easily empty it, vacate it when we have tenant interest.
Okay, so should we do a thumbs down on renovating space B?
I would agree with Jerry Lee. I mean, just what you said, I'm fine with it. And there are a couple of things I have for tenant space A, but for right now,
Okay,
I would say no
Thumbs down.
renovation on B.
Yeah, I would say too, because the prior like staffing level, we could have considered maybe making space B into a conference room and having that separate across the hall for special events. I think that was something that was even looked into before. Whereas now we have the staffing level that makes it where we need the conference space or should have the conference space to get it out of the admin. And, you need an extra
Don's waiting.
full-time office. So probably makes more sense to, and I was also surprised that the brokers said that B was
A
so
desirable.
comparable to A. I would have thought A would have been twice as marketable as B, but they were a lot closer than I
Donna,
expected.
Donna wanted to chime in.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to add that I'm not of the thumbs down on thought process because if we're making renovations, I think we should do it across the board. Making them later down the line may or may not occur, and the contractors and materials, etc., would be different. Plus, making those renovations would, if necessary and if desirable, be more of a way to bring in, a tenant for that banner.
So does that mean like cleaning up that space and making it more desirable, but not necessarily planning for the town offices to take it over? You just mean making it better because we have the workers and the equipment and all that other stuff there? Am I getting that right?
That's what I thought
Yeah.
you said, and it would make
Okay.
sense.
Yeah, just fix it
Yes,
up like everything else.
if the decision is across the board. Now, my opinion is that we would renovate that space for the town itself. However, if that is not the decision made, I would suggest that we renovate everything from left to right, so that it's sensible and cohesive as a unit, and that we're not waiting for another time or place to finish up the task. If we're starting it, we should finish it appropriately. Personally, I think we could use all the space, but if that's not the decision that is made, most definitely at least make sure that we're renovating all the parts.
Would it make a difference if Black Market Bistro were interested in that space? I mean, if they're just going to put cans of tomatoes in there, I don't know that we need to put in, I don't know, is there carpeting? I don't even know what's in there, but is that something that we should take into consideration before we decide the level of of cleaning it up, fixing it up?
Definitely.
Sure. Makes sense.
Yes and no, I would say, because I'm not a fan of the fact that Black Market Bistro has to come upstairs in order to access their pantry, if you will. So if there was a way to not have it upstairs, that would be ideal in my eyes. However, if that's not an option, making sure that that space, in fact, does reflect what they need it for, but I would still renovate it because there's no guarantee that they would be a tenant forever and ever. Hello?
first,
As is,
as is.
right?
But if it turns out that we can't rent it to, say, the current tenants or somebody like that, that we put it as an option on the lumber and light to spruce it up a bit to make it a little more exciting for somebody to want to rent it.
Okay, Barb, is that clear enough for you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many of you had visited Tenant Space B. I mean, I do think if you're really,
I've been-
I don't mean to be, if you're really interested in renting it, I think some work is needed to
Yeah.
make it more marketable. I certainly don't think you're gonna find someone for as small a space as that is to make that kind of investment, so.
Unless they want to use it for tomatoes.
Right, exactly.
Right.
But I think if after we talk to
Right.
Black Market and that doesn't seem workable for whatever reason, at a minimum, it needs to be painted. There needs to be new carpet put in.
Right.
Some at least minimal investment in the space for sure.
Right.
Okay, so we're punting a little bit until we know more information and then, okay.
But I think we do want to go forward with lumber and light on the rest of the space.
That's what-
So we're doing A.
Office,
Hey,
We're doing
A.
A.
Yes,
two-
I'm
two
comfortable with A.
offices
Okay.
For you guys, a small office for the
There.
mayor and a
Okay.
conference room.
So are we
Table.
are we reconfiguring? Right now, there are, I don't know if they're modular walls. I mean, they look pretty great, I think. But they're not permanent. They don't go fully to the ceiling. Are we constructing, are we doing making any actual rooms or partitioning of that space?
I think it's hard to answer. I'd like to talk to them about that. I have had some just discussion as recently as with our IT consulting firm, just about the server. So, with Joanna being as kind, I moved into what was Joanna's office. Kayla moved into where I was. Kayla's office has the server, which is sort of a fairly benign white noise type of thing. What's not so benign is having the copier. But if we were to look at locating the server, it's a fairly decent sized machine. There's certain clearances to get on either side. It does generate a lot of heat, so it needs to be a somewhat larger space.
With the copier, maybe.
More the server, but I think the copier possibly as well.
Right.
I think Stephen and Joanna and I had an email exchange, which I shared with all of you. I think one option, which would not necessarily mean we had to build up walls as much as if we just have a conference room, but the adjacent space is more of archival storage.
Mhm.
Then it doesn't really matter. You don't really have to build a wall up for that. But I think just, if you can give us just some general parameters, we can certainly just kick around some ideas with lumber and light and then bring those back to you if you'd like.
I would think you would, at the very least, the conference room should be something that's sound resistant, soundproof, because you may be holding negotiations with, and you don't know who will be working next door.
Right.
The same, I would say, with the mayor's office and with manager and assistant manager's office should be, basically they'd have, the walls have to go to the ceiling. I mean, unless there's some other way of doing.
I think Phil has a very good point with contract negotiations and things being part of the town's daily business.
Staff meetings.
Employee talks.
Employee talk,
Yeah.
exactly.
Do we need? I mean, often discussions of that nature, sensitive discussions, there's a table in Barb's office
Right.
that seats like 4.
Right.
And it's in an enclosed space. Do we need a space where we could have a discussion like this? Do we need like a 10-person, 8-person?
In the conference room in space
Of any
A.
sort? I mean, like, is that something that we need in general?
Well, one, and Barb can answer this about, as far as say the state or somebody goes, but just picking, for example, Costco or even, for instance, or some of these other places, it's either, yes, you could go take up the whole town hall for something, but maybe somebody else wants to use it or has already
Right.
reserved it. And wouldn't it be nice if you just had a relatively small space that you could have 8 or 10 people who could meet around the table, to do something. And so to me, I would see it as having not only use for the town's business, but also for the business of the town's organizations.
I would probably make 2 comments if I could. One use that comes to mind, and I'm trying to think how many people are around that table, but when we did the pre-construction meeting for the recent sidewalk improvements project, so the contractor had like 3 reps. We had our engineer. I think there were two people from the engineering firm. There was me. The mayor was there. So I think if there would be some benefit, I think, to have maybe seated 8 to 10 people. I think the only comment, Phil, I would make about having outside groups is just, and it depends how outside we're talking about, is you don't want outside parties being able to get into the rest of the office space if they're not connected to the town in some way.
But there's a potential, there's a door that goes into the hallway.
Right.
And if that front space, even though it's the back of the building, if that space were segregated.
Right.
And had a lockable door.
Yeah, I'm thinking more if you're in kind of where you're sitting now, Joanna.
Mhm.
And what is the barrier, if you will, in terms of getting more into the offices? I think some of this would be solved with better furniture, because right now we don't really have many file cabinets at all that are lockable. So just from, we do have a lot of personnel records, vendor records that has banking information and things like that. So I think you would just need to make sure that somehow whoever was using the newly created conference room could not basically enter into other spaces.
Right, but so we are saying we want a space that
That's
would
what I'm
be
hearing.
lockable, that would preclude entering the office space.
I
but
think
still
that would be
have-
ideal. Yeah.
Okay,
Right. Agreed.
okay,
That was one of the reasons we're looking at, I think, at space B a couple of years ago for that purpose, because it's
Right.
across the hall. It's
Right.
Not a big deal to go across the hall from the town office, but
Yeah.
it keeps everybody else out.
yeah, that's a bad space though.
It is a bad space.
And it
I
has some
know
it has some funky angles, if
Yeah.
I'm recalling correctly. So it's not all linear.
I know it's not part of Lumber and Lights scope, but I'd like to see us invest in a contract to digitize a lot of our paper records that we're hanging on to now that don't have records and retention requirements for paper records.
Mhm.
I think we could update our own records management policy. I'm not sure what the state requires, but we could look into that.
Yeah.
But to reduce our paper footprint, I don't think our town archives in the future requires that we retain everything we have as
Yeah.
paper.
I think
And we
that's-
could
that's on
probably.
I think that's on the docket. I think Kayla, you're
Great.
working on that a little bit.
Yeah.
And Claire. Yeah. But yeah, we definitely need to, that needs to be something that we take into consideration.
Yeah, as I had shared with Joanna, we were starting to digitize office in my records in Westminster. And I think the one thing to keep in mind is, there are staffing resources associated with the upfront part of digitizing records, which I know you do a lot of in your own office.
Right.
Is that a good investment? Yes, I definitely think it is.
Okay. All right, so thumbs up for space A, thumbs up for a closed off or lockable room for a 10-person
Right.
conference table.
Yep.
Thumbs up for a closable door office-y space for the mayor.
Yep.
Kitchen. Was one of the options using that little tiny kitchen space for the server and the printer, or doing something configuration with that?
I'd have to go back. They were going to try to kind of upgrade the kitchen in some way. And Elizabeth and Kayla and I were having some discussion about this. Kayla and I measured the server yesterday. While the server will physically fit in that space, it doesn't
Not
have the
clearance.
appropriate clearances. And I think it's just so confined. I think it would get to the risk of overheating. So I think one of the things we need to do now that we have a little bit more direction from our IT consultant is, obviously you don't really want to put a server under a sprinkler head in case, God forbid, there was a problem. So we don't have any kind of halogen system or anything like that. Kayla, I think, had a great idea. If it'll work, it might be a nice space for the copier, because when someone's in there microwaving or something, you don't tend to hear the sound as much. But I think we'll just kind of explore all those options and just see what's going to work the best at the least cost and bring that back to you all. And what I also, just in closing this off with tenant space B, what I understand is I'm free to talk to Barbara Black a little bit more about what she has in mind. I mean, I sent her the square footage for the space. And depending on how those conversations go, what you'd like to do, if that isn't workable, is at least upgrade tenant space B to some kind of base level. So it kind of works whether it's for the town or it's for a rental space. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Agreed.
Donna is back in. I don't, she doesn't have her hand up. I don't know if she has any comments to offer, but she had to go in and out of the meeting a couple
Okay.
times.
Are there any other things that we require for functionality? Are there any other things that we say, you know, these are the musts for Barb? Or for Barb to give direction to the designers?
Does the bathroom already meet ADA?
Does the bathroom already meet ADA?
I doubt
Is
it.
that even part of our?
I don't think it does.
I think it's worth checking
Yeah.
and getting an
Okay.
optionality of
Yeah.
cost for that. I think whenever we can, we should upgrade to ADA.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't believe it does meet standards currently.
I think improving access to Wi-Fi and any of that stuff is, I
Yeah.
know you've done the hardwired things, you've upgraded that, but
Yeah.
that's not the,
So if I can add on, and I think this gets to kind of Stephen's comments about, you know, what time frame are we looking at? So we did have a wiring consultant come in because we are basically running off of Wi-Fi and there have been some stability issues. It's been much better lately, knock on wood, because that can change. We've had the wires pulled down from the basement, but we did not have them dropped into the ceiling to hardwire any of the staff computers because I wasn't sure where people were going to be. So I think just as we continue this conversation right now, they're all just up in the ceiling. And I think it'll just be a comfort level of once we bring something back to you all, are we comfortable basically hardwiring those systems? I think that would be best from a stability standpoint.
And from a security standpoint.
Right.
It's usually the big deal.
Yeah.
The other thing along those lines, just to mention, is you had briefly talked about the possibility of getting a generator.
Yes.
You might, I don't know what the discussion was, but just if you decide you want to segregate out certain circuits, you might want to
Yeah.
keep that in mind during the renovation. If we're going to open up walls or something that we may
Right.
have to pull new wiring so that we know they go to a generator if you're just going to confine yourself to certain stuff.
Right. Thank you.
And somebody should ask the post office and black market if they have any interest in, if a generator would be usable, valuable to them, and then size it appropriately and.
Yeah.
and get them to help
see
pay.
if the-
Yeah, well, I think as Lisa seems very knowledgeable on you know, the continuity of how long you're trying to keep something running and how many functions drives the cost and the size of the generator.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
You know, George and I had a discussion just about placement because I was just, like I said, we were just talking about it and he feels like he's identified a place where a generator could go. And as we were sort of talking about what would need to be on it and, you know, are we planning to use the town office as more of almost emergency operations center if something, you know, you have a crisis. He certainly brought up the post office just because, you know, depending on the duration of any type of outage, there are people who are reliant on the post office for medications and things like that. So it's certainly something we could talk to them about. I guess in my mind, the post office is certainly a much more critical function in many ways in Black Market, though if we were all sleeping at the town offices, having an easy place to get something to eat would be great.
Yeah, I mean, you should
Yeah.
ask.
Yeah, I will.
If you need some help being an electrical engineer, I'll be happy to
That'd be great.
throw some.
Good.
Barb, have we answered your questions?
Yeah,
Do you
I think I have the direction I need. I guess I would just like to, as we're wrapping up, Donna, did you have anything you want to add to the discussion now that you managed to get back into the meeting?
No, I made some notes in the chat. So we
Oh,
can
sorry.
relay that. It was just confirming with what Barbara was saying about her understanding of the process going forward. And I just wanted to add that I would recommend having light and lumber actually do renovate that lobby, if you will.
Okay.
It is the first thing people see when they walk into town offices, and I think it's just as important. Doesn't mean we have to get rid of anybody's books or anything like that. Just relocate them. But I think that is quite vital as well.
Okay. Right.
One
Thank you.
last thing. Sorry, Donna. One last thing, the optionality of exterior fire suppression again
Okay.
for a historic wood frame building. next door to railroad tracks is not a bad idea.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's going to be lumber and lights expertise. That might be something.
Does the building?
Well, yeah, just to cost it out.
There are some sprinklers in it. Yeah,
Interior.
but you're talking about the exterior of it.
Exterior and interior.
Yeah. If
Can
there's
we
some interest
also
in that-
double check
an
if the post office and the restaurant actually already have backup generators? Somehow I
think they
think
do.
they might.
I don't think so, Donna, but I can certainly, I'll check that with Barbara Black and can certainly I can talk to George about it. He'll be
Yeah, I don't
returning.
think you're there now.
I don't either.
So,
Thank you.
so I guess the last question is to what extent, so Barb wants to bring it, will bring it back to us after. So she'll take this information, get it to Lumber and Light, get them working, and then they'll bring it back to us
Right.
so
Yeah.
that we sort of
Yeah.
stay engaged and know that stuff.
Yeah,
And
I'd like
then-
you all to make sure you're comfortable and that we've kind of abided by your direction.
And the same with the RFP for the office
Definitely.
building too.
Yes,
Just
yes,
a
definitely.
review before it goes up.
I think I probably need more direction on that, Phil, than probably the town office. So
All right.
I would appreciate you
All
all
right, so
looking
Barb,
at
we're gonna
that.
have all this stuff by noon tomorrow.
Yeah. I'm gonna go home, caffeinate up. I'll just bang it out.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I am happy to say that it is 9:25
Well
and
done.
we are done for the evening. This was a very productive discussion,
was.
pair of discussions.
It's a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think
Thank you.
we've moved forward very well and very firmly, I think, and we're.
Yep.
This is great. Wonderful. Thank you so
Good
much.
job.
And we're adjourned.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Good night,
Donna.
Donna.
Time away.